Well, welcome to ELEVENSES. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and if you tuned in just a couple of minutes ago, you'll know that I was once again having live streaming problems with the show. So this is a recording, and it will be going out as a recording in about 40 minutes time after I've actually finished taking you through today's show. It's show number 281. It's Sunday the 23rd of October, and as I said a few minutes ago, it's a bit miserable out there at the moment here in London, but there are patches of blue sky appearing, and it does seem to have stopped raining, at least for the moment, which is good news. So what have I got for you in today's show? Well, fairly packed with international news, actually. And Sacoolas has pleaded guilty to causing death by dangerous driving. That'll be our top story. Wandsworth is becoming the first council to run its own 20-mile-per-hour speed cameras, which will be a joy if you happen to live or work down that way. Motorcycle deaths are targeted in a new World Health Organization manual. Hackney, despite protests, are pushing ahead with their bike parking charges right across the borough, whether you park in a residence bay or whether you park in a public motorcycle bay. Edinburgh has wound up their anti-theft operation, and from Kent there's a story about a motorcycle which was gone in less than 30 seconds. MSV are introducing a red and yellow card system for their track day events. A MotoGP rider had a bit of a shock when his airbag went off mid-race. Finland, meanwhile, has lost its MotoGP event for 2023 as the KimiRing seems to be unable to pay the bills. And finally, today's discussion point, I'll hark back to what's going on in Hackney as well as what has been happening in other places like Cambridge, to ask if motorcycling is under attack. That will come up in about 30 minutes or so. So stay tuned if you want to hear that particular story. Don't forget, this is a recorded event today due to the fact that I was having streaming problems a few minutes ago. Now, before I crack on with the actual stories themselves, I just want to take you through a couple of things I wanted to talk about briefly. The first is that whilst today's show is packed with international news, something I'm sure you'll know if you are a regular here is that I have been covering news stories from around the world for well, ever since basically I opened the show. And one of the stories I've been looking at is the problems facing the motorcycle taxi drivers known as Okada, and how their commercial riding has been banned in parts of Nigeria. Now, I've been covering this story, the rationale behind how motorcycles are perceived as a problem in parts of Nigeria, the legislation that was introduced, the policing of that legislation, how bikes have been seized and crushed, taken away basically from those using them in defiance of the ban, and also the hardship being caused to those who use those bikes to actually earn a living. Now, on Friday, the story finally made it into the mainstream press here in the UK when The Guardian ran the story under the headline, "Totally Damning, Lagos Motorcycle Taxi Ban Leaves Drivers Destitute." Now, I would have put that up in the comments. I've been running a live show. It's a little bit trickier to do as I'm running a recording. Not so easy to put those up. But if you do a search for for the Guardian article, Lagos Motorcycle Taxi Ban, I'm sure you'll find it and be able to read it very easily. It was Friday, October the 21st. And one other note, I have finally managed to set up the booking page for November's online talk series event. And this will be what I believe will be a genuinely fascinating look at the role that sports psychology can play in rider development. Now, riding is undeniably at least part a sport for us. And what I really want to focus on more than anything is how we can use our own built-in simulator in the brain to prepare for those ultra rare situations which we'll almost never experience in real life, such as the Smithy event. So find out how we can use visualization to prepare for riding emergencies without even leaving our own armchair. That will be on that'll be Wednesday the 2nd of November at 8 p.m. Tickets are £5, by the way. So do come along, join me there, and hopefully hopefully you'll learn something new about how our brain works. Always do sort of use your brain when you're riding a motorcycle, I think. So, okay, on with the news. Now, the first story is that the US citizen Anne Sacoolas has actually pleaded guilty to causing the death of the 19-year-old motorcyclist Harry Dunn in a collision which happened outside RAF Crawton in Northamptonshire on the evening of the 27th of August 2019. Police investigators revealed that the crash, which happened around 400 yards from the airbase exit, resulted from her driving on the wrong side of the road. Now, although the roads on the base itself, which is actually an RAF facility, like all the American bases in the UK, are the British layout, the BBC reported that the Sacoolas family had only been in the UK for 3 weeks. So the implication is that they hadn't sort of fully acclimated or got used to driving on our side of the road. Now, the defendant, who is on unconditional bail, appeared at the Old Bailey via a video link from the US. Now, although Sacoolas had cooperated with the police at the scene of the crash and was interviewed next day at her home, the case has since been mired in controversy after the 45-year-old had diplomatic immunity asserted on her behalf by the US government following the crash. Her husband had been working as an intelligence officer at the airbase, and Sacoolas herself is alleged to be a former CIA officer. Now, as a result, she was able to leave the UK 19 days after the incident, and it prompted a 3-year campaign to have the case brought to court. You probably recall some of the more bizarre incidents that went on, including the Dunn family meeting the American president Trump at the time. Now, Sacoolas pleaded not guilty to the more serious charge of causing death by dangerous driving, and the guilty plea of careless driving was accepted by the Crown Prosecution Service after they consulted with Dunn's family. Following the brief hearing, the judge requested that she appear in person for sentencing. Mrs. Justice Bobby Chima Grubb told Sacoolas that there was nothing to stop her attending a sentencing hearing during the week commencing 28th November. And she said the personal attendance and voluntary surrender to the court of Mrs. Sacoolas would provide weighty evidence indeed of genuine remorse. And she added that the offence carries a maximum sentence of 5 years imprisonment, though she pointed out that the range of sentencing guidelines is from a medium-sized community order to 3 years custody. Now, the family of Harry Dunn said that they would be continuing to seek a public inquiry into the involvement of the Foreign Office, ministers and authorities who had allowed her to leave the country. Now, there have been at least 2 further near misses involving cars driving on the wrong side of the road near RAF Crawton, one of which appears to have a registration number indicating it was possibly a US government vehicle. So that story, I believe, probably has some way to run yet. Now, Wandsworth is about to become the first local authority in the country which has the power to issue fines to drivers who breach 20-mile-per-hour limits, and they will be able to do that independently of the police. Now, councils believe that speed limits in residential areas are largely going unenforced, and Wandsworth will prioritise 2 roads where residents frequently complain about speeding drivers. The pilot scheme, which will run for up to 8 months, starts as soon as next week, and if successful, the council-run speed cameras could be rolled out across the capital. Now, it's not clear yet whether the cameras will be fixed or mobile, but Wandsworth did proudly present 2 new electric CCTV-equipped cars to the public back in January. Now, Brent, where I live, has a couple of similar vehicles, and the thing is that they can park up in a street between other cars, and they're very difficult to spot. The camera just basically pokes over the roof of other vehicles. These cars have been used to monitor offences such as blocking school keep clear markings, drivers ignoring no turn restrictions on specific roads, and also enforcing designated cycle lane rules. Now, the council say that for the first few weeks, drivers caught by the new cameras will receive a warning letter, but after that, £130 fines, reduced to £65 if paid within a fortnight, will be issued. But since these are not police cameras, the usual 3 points that issues from with a police caution cannot be attached to your license. At least that's one good piece of information there. Now, earlier this month, the World Health Organization, WHO, and their partners launched an updated manual which offers global guidelines to curb motorcycle fatalities. Now, motorcycles and three-wheelers obviously deliver mobility to millions of people around the world. I've just talked about Nigeria and Lagos, for example. But the trouble is that around 30% of all road deaths across the world also involve motorcycles, mopeds, scooters, and also e-bikes now are also starting to join that list. And the numbers are continuing to rise. 9 out of 10 of these traffic deaths actually happen in low and middle income countries. For example, Thailand and Cambodia, for example. Motorcycle deaths accounted for 73 and 74% respectively of all road deaths in 2016. The stats also show that it's young adults who are particularly at risk between 15 and 34. They account for 60% plus of all powered 2 and 3-wheeler related deaths in these same low and middle income countries. Now, key risks for motorcycle injuries, probably fairly familiar to you. They include riders not wearing helmets, speeding, alcohol impairment, mixed traffic conditions, a lack of protection from the vehicle in a crash, and a lack of safe infrastructure for powered 2 and 3-wheel vehicles, such as poor road surfaces and roadside hazards. And that seems to be a problem which could equally apply to a developed country like the UK, frankly. Anyway, the publication is co-produced by the World Health Organization, the Global Road Safety Partnership, the FIA Foundation, they are the people responsible for motor racing, you probably know, and the World Bank. And it gets support from Bloomberg Philanthropies. It includes evidence and case studies from a range of low and middle income countries. So the manual basically gives guidelines on developing safer roads, ensuring safer mobility for all road users, vehicle safety standards, and actions to improve emergency responses to crashes. And it also aims to have nations adopt a safe systems approach, which recognizes that road transport is a complex system with interconnecting elements that affect each other. Right, okay, so just quickly, don't forget you are watching Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is a recording today due to streaming problems, but generally speaking, the show goes out live. It certainly, hopefully, go out live again on Wednesday. I hope I don't continue to have these problems on Sundays. It'll be very, very irritating. If you can't set a reminder to catch the show live, don't forget you can get the show over on my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget all important UK, or you will find somebody trying to sharpen knives with Boy Scouts or something along those lines. So, right, okay, on with the show. Now, a recognition that road transport is a complex interconnecting system is something I would say that Hackney Council would do well to recognise. Despite meeting with protesters earlier this month, Hackney Council has now confirmed that it will press ahead with its charges to charge all motorcycles for parking anywhere in the borough, as agreed in their cabinet in February 2021. And the new system will place motorcycles on the same footing as other vehicles, with permit prices based solely on emissions that they produce. Now, when presented with evidence of local workers or residents who would be adversely affected by these swinging charges, one example was a student nurse who commutes to Hackney from south of the river, from Croydon, I think it was. She works and then uses her PTW to get to patients' homes at short notice in the Hackney area. The council are reported to have responded that in these cases, people should walk, cycle, or take public transport. Once that was made public, the council actually denied making that statement. Now, the Save London Motorcycle Group have headed these protests, and they claim that when the public consultation was held, the scale of the new charges, which could reach £14,000 a year if bikes are parked daily in public parking bays, was not made clear. So they argue that the mandate from the public consultation, which was generally positive, simply doesn't exist. And they further argue that Hackney Council were unable to present any evidence for the claimed negative impact that they say PTWs cause across the borough. Now, although the council said that the charging will be based on emissions, they actually are refusing to allow electric PTWs to be parked for free. And their rationale basically is that they want to exclude all powered vehicles other than e-bicycles. And they said, quote, "We believe that our decision to treat all vehicles, including electric PTWs, in a consistent and fair way will over time lead to growth in cycling and the use of public transport in and around Hackney." Well, frankly, that is cold comfort to the people who rely on PTWs to get in and out of Hackney and to work in the borough, and to those who cannot cycle physically, or those who are faced with time-consuming and expensive journeys on public transport to get into or across the borough, because the council refused to accept that PTWs are actually, in the right circumstances, part of the solution and not part of the problem. Now, what was I going to say next? Oh yes, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, if you want to continue to support me while I research these stories and relay them to you, do drop me a line on my Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com, survival skills. If you buy me a cuppa over there, your £3 helps support the time I spend putting these shows together for you twice a week. So do come over there and support me. And of course, when you do buy me a cuppa, you also get access for a month to hundreds and hundreds of better biking articles. And if you become a subscriber, a regular supporter rather, you get even more benefits. So do look in on my Ko-fi page and see what's over there on offer for you. Right, so crossing the world, contrast Hackney's "we don't want motorcycles on our patch" attitude with an ambitious plan which aims to transition taxi bike riders to e-bikes in Rwanda. Now, there was a promising initial pilot scheme which had good results, and now the e-bikes are going to be launched in Kigali, which is said to be Africa's greenest city. The partnership, which is between Bbox, a finance company, and an e-mobility company called Ampersand, will provide the e-bikes and the e-motos and the battery swaps to riders, and ultimately plans on delivering sustainable transport solutions right across East Africa. Now, the scheme will allow taxi bike riders to use these electric motorcycles for their commercial activities at a lower daily cost than petrol vehicles. And basically, the alternative option is said to prove to be could be up to 40% more profitable than using a petrol bike, according to Ampersand's data. I'm slightly worried with schemes like this because, of course, it does tie those riders into one ecosystem when it comes to which bike they're using. But hey ho, it is a model which would seem to benefit both the environment and the economy. Now, the partnership will help Rwanda towards achieving the country's aims of reducing 4.6 million tons of CO2 emissions by 2030 and becoming a carbon neutral economy by 2050. Right now, the existing petrol engine moto taxis are the second biggest emitter of CO2 in the country, and they create 1/3 of the total emissions from road traffic. Now, back to Blighty, and in Edinburgh, the Operation Soteria, which I've been talking about in past shows, tackling motorcycle theft and the antisocial and reckless use of off-road motorcycles in the Scottish capital, has been wound up for the year. But it is being hailed by the police as a success because they have recovered 131 motorcycles with a total value of more than £600,000. Officers say they made 36 arrests and 185 charges for a variety of offences. Some of those, of course, would have been the antisocial behaviour aspect of the project, but they will continue to work to ensure offenders are dealt with robustly. Now, I do appreciate there are limited resources for the police, and the police have a wide variety of policing tasks, but I do doubt that the criminal elements will be taking time off this autumn and winter after this particular project is wound up. But the scale of the problem isn't entirely down to the police. Now, a Kent paper tells the story of a new rider who decided a motorcycle was the way to defeat traffic on the way into the Medway towns. As is an area which I'm very familiar. The roads are particularly congested, and I will also point out, for those who think public transport is an option, public transport is completely crap in the area. Buses, for example, are virtually non-existent, and there are limited numbers of train lines going in the right direction. So this rider decided the motorcycle was the way to get to work. He bought a £4,000 KTM, passed his test on a Friday, got the bike insured on a Saturday, had it taxed on Sunday, drove it to work for the first time on Monday, and had it stolen on Tuesday evening. Now, the bike was effectively unsecured because the rider had placed his faith in the steering lock, and CCTV video footage shows the thief in a hoodie walking up to the bike as it was sitting in a company car park in a dark corner and simply yanking the bars to snap the steering lock and then wheeling the bike out of camera shot, and all in less than 30 seconds. Now, you can point the finger at the rider for his naivety in assuming that his steering lock was an effective anti-theft device and lack of other precautions that probably a more experienced rider would have taken. But frankly, the failure of that supposed security device offered by the KTM company is, not to put too fine a point on it, criminal in itself. Bikes should simply not be on the market with such substandard locks. Now, yes, a sophisticated thief can break into just about anything. You only have to look at computer hacking to see that. But the fact is, motorcycles are almost always vulnerable to the application of a bit of brute force, and it doesn't take any machinery to snap a steering lock, as you can see. And I think it's high time that the bike industry did something other than trying to suggest that the solution is to buy from them high-priced locks and alarm systems. Right, okay, after that little rant, what's next? Well, Motorsports Vision are the UK's largest track day operator, and they've announced that they're introducing a series of yellow and red card warnings to riders displaying what they described as poor etiquette on track days. MSV says that the number of offending riders is very low, but they will still monitor riders on all their circuits from next year. Now, despite track days, of course, being totally non-competitive in theory, MSV says that some of the things that they see include close, aggressive or dangerous overtaking, rider contact, which is a bit scary, overtaking under a red or yellow flag, and showing aggression towards other customers and staff. And it says that will be all those will be amongst the offences covered by its new penalty system. And riders will receive a verbal warning, which will effectively be their yellow card. For a particularly bad event, they will be excluded from the rest of the day, the track day, and that is considered a red card offence. 2 yellows will be treated as a single red card, just like football. And the new system is designed to weed out repeat offenders. MSV said once the customer has received, has the equivalent of 2 red cards, they will receive a 6-month ban. Another red is a 12-month ban. Another red after a 12-month ban is a lifelong ban. Naturally, something particularly bad can cut short any of these steps, as it does now. So presumably they could go straight to the lifetime ban. Right. On track still, Finland's KimiRing in the north of the country, I think it is, was set to host the MotoGP circus next year, but Dorna Sports, the series organizer, has actually removed the 2023 Finnish Grand Prix from the calendar for the 3rd time. Now, it seems that despite the promotion agreement being concluded in July 2021, the payments for hosting the event, which are said to be around 6.4 million euros, have never reached Dorna. And it also appears that the companies that have helped build the circuit itself are also unpaid and have filed a claim against the circuit. Now, instead, Dorna has placed Kazakhstan on the list for a GP for next year to be held at the newly completed Sacoolas International Circuit, and of course 20 2023 will also see the Bud International Circuit hosting the first Indian motorcycle Grand Prix, and that replaces the Spanish, the Aragon GP in Spain. Now, also on track, meanwhile, there was a scary moment for Ducati's MotoGP rider, Enia Bastianini. I always have trouble pronouncing his name. His Ducati apparently suffered a massive head shake coming out of the last corner on the first lap of last weekend's Grand Prix, and the airbag in his leathers went off. Now, after the airbag deflated, he was able to recover to finish a very creditable fifth. It's interesting the amount of force that the head shake must have generated if the airbag thought that was a crash. The sort of the accelerometers built into that airbag. So, right. Okay, that's the end of today's news items. So we're going to shift on to today's discussion point. Don't forget, though, if you want something to read as we move into the autumn months and the weather is less kind. As I said, it's been raining hard this morning. It looks a bit patchy at the moment out there. You can head over to my Lulu page, where my publishers have the list of books that I've written up for sale. You can order direct. It'll take a couple of weeks for the book to turn up, but it's a very quick and convenient process to order. The books are all listed, and you can read a resume of the books, and you can order anything you like from my list of books over there on my lulu.com/spotlight/survival skills website. Don't forget, there's a capital S and a capital S on survival and skills. Don't ask me why. It's just the way that the page got set up. Right, okay, so on to today's discussion point. Is motorcycling under fire? Well, the death of motorcycling has been predicted more times than I can remember. I can think back to, well, before I was born, the helmet law. I can remember people writing about that and how it killed motorcycling. Well, there were still plenty of people riding motorcycles when I when I grew up, when I was a teenager. There were people saying that the change of the round the block bike test to the part 1, part 2 in the early 1980s would be the death of motorcycling. At the same time, riders were restricted to 125s on L plate. It hardly seems possible. That was 40 years ago, but it was. That was also going to kill motorcycling. Well, it didn't. CBT, when you had to do a compulsory day before you could even go riding, that again was said to be death of motorcycling. Direct access, 97, when you were going to be training on big bikes and everybody predicted how expensive it was going to be and how people would stop training. You've got the message. And so death of motorcycling has been predicted over and over and over. But now it does seem that motorcycling is under some kind of systematic attack. And the attack is not directed at stopping people getting on bikes. It's not even directed at preventing recreational riding. It's actually targeting the use of motorcycles in their primary role as a means of transport from getting to one place to another, and most specifically from being used as a means of getting to work. Now, in some ways, as I've said, these attacks on motorcycling aren't new. 20 odd years ago, you may remember Police Chief Richard Brunstrom from North Wales Police. Now, he very, very seriously was pushing for motorcycles to be banned altogether from some of Wales roads. From the Snowdonia National Park was a particular target of him. He courted regular controversy. He attacked motorcyclists endlessly in his online blog. I believe he was ably assisted by his deputy chief constable on his attacks on motorcycling. And one of his most outrageous stunts was showing pictures of a decapitated rider at a press conference. Now, fortunately, he retired, I think, 2009, with his plans unfulfilled. But back in the spring of 2020, Oxfordshire County Council actually took over where he left off. Now, they used the COVID lockdown as a means to introduce what they described as a radical engagement document on motorcycling as part of their broader local transport and connectivity plan. Now, these plans are regularly put forward by all councils because they kind of explain how they intend to work with the transport network and what they can do to improve it, what they can do to change it. But this was aimed directly at motorcycles, and the document was sent out to the general public, and it was stated that the idea was to help gather your opinion and thoughts on the topic in question. But they also claimed that they were setting out some basic information and facts about a particular topic. Now, in the case of motorcycling, as part of that document, the document was actually full of loaded language. That is language which predisposes people to read it and be influenced by that language. And it was anti-bike, and much of it wasn't fact, it was simply opinion. So to give you a flavour of what this document said, there was a very short for section and then a long list of negatives, such as suggesting that bikes suffer a reputation for being dangerous. Well, now, reputation isn't fact. Yes, if you do look at the casualty stats, riders are overrepresented when it comes to fatalities on the road. But there is no evidence that we crash more often than car drivers. We're just more at risk when we do it. The document also stated that statistical evidence suggests that motorcyclists are a danger to themselves. Well, if that means we get hurt when we fall off, I guess it's right, because again, you know, if we crash at much the same rate as car drivers, we do get hurt more often than car drivers. So I can't really argue with that. But the fact is that we're not sitting in a tin box hurting other people when we hit someone. We are the people who are on the receiving end. So it's all about perspective. The majority of crashes, if not fatalities, which create injury to motorcyclists involve collisions with other vehicles. And it's almost always the other driver who precipitates that collision. Now, overall, the vast majority of riders actually complete their journeys in safety. They do not crash. You know, the roads are not littered with fallen motorcycles, whatever the popular press and documents like this would like to tell us. The real risk of riding a motorcycle and suffering an injury isn't all that high. You're actually far more likely to have a fatal accident in the home. Every year in the UK, there are around 6,000 deaths as a result of home accidents. There are actually around 300 deaths on motorcycles. Now, another claim was that motorcycles are mostly still using fossil fuels to run, meaning they are environmentally unsound, not sustainable, and contribute to air pollution. Well, yes, that's true as far as it goes, but what they didn't say was that most modern bikes match ICE cars on pollution, and smaller machines will travel further on less fuel than a car. So if you swap out your Range Rover for a 250 or 300cc commuter bike, let alone a little 50cc scooter, you will be saving the planet, comparatively speaking. And even in 2020, electric bikes were starting to appear. The future is clearly moving away from the ICE. So what about that statement that motorcycles make a substantial contribution to noise pollution? Well, yes, I would say we are our own worst enemy here. We're regularly switching out exhaust cans for something illegal. We're egged on by the importers who often sell replacement silencers with removable baffles alongside their new machines, and by aftermarket manufacturers who brazenly produce non-approved exhausts for road bikes. That's a trading standards and it's a policing issue. It's not something that warrants a ban on the use of motorcycles. And that said, most motorcycles do retain their standard exhausts. And then there was a claim that there are recorded activities in other places showing drops in collisions once motorized two-wheelers have been banned from specific lanes other than roads. Now, apart from that claim being unsubstantiated, no reference was provided. I'd like to know what they're talking about. What does specific lanes other than roads actually mean? Are we talking about green lanes, the sort of the paths which are the roads which are unpaved, which run through the countryside? Are we talking about the bans on motorcycles from using those? If it is, the number of riders who actually use those roads is tiny compared with road riders. The number of incidents on those public highways must be even tinier. Are we talking about banning bikes from cycle paths? In some countries, small capacity powered two-wheelers are allowed to use them. I have no idea what that statement means. My favourite was motorbikes are substantially larger than bicycles, so they take more land space to park in busy urban environments. Well, yeah, you can probably squeeze 50% more cycles in to the same space that you can park a motorcycles. But go and have a look at some of the places where bicycles are parked. Look at the security that has to be provided to stop them being stolen. And suddenly you begin to get the idea that, in fact, by the time you've actually got a cycle rack in, you're not getting many more bicycles in than you would if you parked motorcycles side by side. And where you do park bikes, you can get them into the parking space, obviously, that a car uses, in quantity, because you need to leave room between vehicles for them to move it in and out of the parking space. You need to leave room for doors to open. Bikes park sort of nose into the pavement and just slide in and out. So you can squeeze motorcycle parking into spaces where physically you can't fit a car. Think of all the odd corners in supermarkets and on roads that are used for motorcycle parking. I really don't see that as an argument that bicycles take up less space. And on the road, a PTW actually doesn't take up much more room on the road due to the need to give riders safe space around them. Think the 2 meter plus ruling that's now in the highway code. And of course, in a queue, motorcycles can bunch up tight. You can get between 4 and 6 motorcycles into the same space a car takes up. But none of this logical thinking has stopped Hackney Council launching into their attack on motorcycle parking across the borough and implementing these charging plans, which will hit anyone who parks a bike firmly in their pocket. I mentioned Cambridgeshire's plan at the top of the show. Why is that not coming up? There it is. That's the one I wanted to pop up. That was what they said about motorcycle parking. As I reported last week, they're the latest area to attack powered two-wheelers via their sustainable transport plan. The Greater Cambridgeshire or Cambridge Partnership, the GCP, proposed to charge motorcycles the same £5 to access the proposed lower vehicle area as cars. MAG's Director of Campaigns and Political Engagement, Colin Brown, he analysed the plan and he said, once again, we're dealing with what can only be described as anti-motorcycling prejudice. Had the council been willing to engage with us, we could have provided plenty of evidence for motorcycles reducing congestion and improving air quality. He pointed out that the claim you cannot apply a lower charge due to difficulties with ANPR number plate cameras not reading the rear plates of bikes is sheer stupidity. As he pointed out, how do they intend to apply the charge if their cameras can't read the plate? It doesn't matter. You either can read it or you can't read it. You can't suggest that you can't apply the lower charge because that plate wouldn't be read, but you can only apply the higher charge because that plate will be read. Nonsense. One claim made by the partnership is that motorcycles are incompatible with pedal cycles. Yet, frankly, the London experience with PTWs in bus lanes, which they share with cycles, would appear to contradict that. There have been no significant increase in injuries to cyclists that I'm aware of. And of course, if you head somewhere like the Netherlands, you'll find an extensive network of cycle lanes which mopeds and bicycles happily coexist in. But if there's one area where I think MAG and the motorcycle industry generally only have one leg to stand on, and that's when they make that claim, we could have provided plenty of evidence for motorcycles reducing congestion and, quote, improving air quality. Well, yes, I think motorcycles, the fact they do reduce congestions is pretty clear. But the fact is, if you're commuting your 10 miles to work on your BMW 1250 GS, you are part of the problem and not part of the solution. Large capacity motorcycles are not cleaner than small IC engined cars, let alone self-driving or self-charging hybrids. Now, I drove an Audi hybrid 1,000 miles across California, including taking in the urban nightmare that is Los Angeles, and the car returned over 65 mpg. That's UK gallons, by the way, not the dwarf US gallons, and that's around 15% better economy than my XJ6 Yamaha could have managed on a similar journey, and that's not a bike with high fuel consumption. And that leads us really to the shift to new technology, and specifically towards electric motorcycles. Now, while hybrids and hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen ICE engines are getting lots of talking up at the moment, those engines are still on the drawing board. We've seen a couple of prototypes, but at the moment there are a long way from building anything that is going to go into production. But there are perfectly usable electric motorcycles here right now on sale. Now, some are affordable, some are admittedly rather pricey, but they work. I took a Zero out for a test ride back in 2019, and I really thought at the end of my time on the bike, if I could get this bike recharged in an hour whilst I was having lunch, I could use that bike for training. But right now, that kind of infrastructure is what's missing. As I've said before, it's no good sticking public chargers into lampposts. It needs to be in the places we actually ride the bikes to in order to recharge for the journey home, such, for example, as the cafes that I use on my stops on my course. Now, right now, that infrastructure simply isn't there. So I agree with MAG when they say that these bikes cannot yet be used for touring. It's not the bike that's the problem, it's the infrastructure. But certainly for short rides, and specifically for commuting, I really think electric bikes should be pushed. And I think that MAG should be encouraging the adoption of low-powered electric motorcycles for commuting purposes. And that way, I think the organisation is much more likely to be listened to. All right, that brings me to the end of today's show. It's taken just a wee bit longer than planned due to technical issues trying to get it up online first thing. Don't forget the events, there they are. The November live talk event is on Armchair Riding, how we can use visualisation from sports psychology to improve our ability to respond to emergency events which are difficult to otherwise look at. And then December, I'll be back to Science of Being Seen, the full presentation for its third and final show this particular year. So hopefully you're not too disappointed that you can get the show live, that you caught up with it later. I do apologize once again for the technical issues. I am trying to find out what the problem is. If I can't resolve it, I will probably end up recording Sunday's shows to go out at 11 rather than trying to do them live and having to drop out in sort of midstream, as it were. Right, so that really is it today. Thank you very much indeed for looking in. Anything else I wanted to say? No, I think I've covered everything. So if you are out there on your bike today, as the roads get slippery at this time of year, do stay shiny side up.